All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's Alumni Spotlight with Danny Breslauer. I think I pronounced your last name right.
Got it.
Danny is a Rutgers alumnus. He graduated from, I believe, the School of Arts and Sciences.
Rutgers College. Final class of Rutgers College.
The final class of Rutgers College. And he is pretty much everywhere when it comes to Rutgers. I think that most people would know him from the podcast that he does with John Newman. He is absolutely everywhere, and we're really glad to have him as an alumni spotlight. So Danny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. I appreciate it, and thanks for the plug for the Scarlet Spotlight.
Of course, we're actually going to be hosting some of the interviews for Scarlet Spotlight on the REA's website as part of our 1766 Extras program as soon as I can figure out how to more quickly transcribe them.
I was going to say, I don't pity you having to figure out how to transcribe some of those, but yeah.
So let's actually start. Let's start with your time as a student.
Sure.
So you were the last class of Rutgers College. What was that like?
Yeah.
And what brought you to Rutgers?
Yeah, so I can start with what brought me to Rutgers. I basically grew up on campus. My father, Kenneth Breslauer, was founding dean of the Division of Life Sciences, and has been at Rutgers for 47 years.
Wow.
He's a university professor, Linus C. Pauling professor of chemistry and chemical biology, biophysical chemist, I believe, by trade. His lab does cancer research, drug DNA mutations and binding. And obviously right now is also focused on COVID research. So I grew up across the river in Highland Park, but at the same time was essentially raised on campus, both academically and athletically. We were season ticket holders for Rutgers basketball and football since I was a little kid. Always knew it's where I wanted to go. Had a brief dalliance with the idea of doing journalism at Northwestern and spent the summer before my senior year of high school out there. But it was a no-brainer for me that Rutgers was the only place that I wanted to go. Had all the resources and tools that I needed as well. When I was in high school, I interned for Bruce Johnson, who was the voice of Rutgers Athletics at the time, WCTC Radio. Learned a lot about the ins and outs of the industry. And Tim Espar was the broadcast administrator at WRSU at the time. Brought me for a tour of the facilities my senior year. And he's like, listen, can't hand you the keys to the car day one, but if you learn it, I'm sure that you'll move up the progression here and have administrative roles. And that's what happened. I was a sports staffer, eventually became sports director my junior year, and then was the general manager of the entire station in 09-10, my senior year, obviously in conjunction with my classwork at then Skills, now Sky, with many great professors there during my time.
So you mentioned WRSU. I believe you ran Nightline, right?
The Nightline was the post-game show for all of the games. So the staff in conjunction ran Nightline. I was the host of the Scarlet Pulse with Adam Helfgott. We did a show for, I guess it was 3 of my 4 years, because Adam was a freshman when I was a sophomore. Also worked on Sports Night, which was the flagship show that the RSU sports staff did during the week. Really, it's a 24/7 station with community involvement as well. And I think that's the cool part for the students that do get involved is in early days, you learn how to deal with folks that are older than you and may have been set in their ways and need some compromising. And I think for me, certainly as an executive at the station, it was great experience for how to discuss preemptions with people who have had shows for 25 years as sports games may have stamped on their slots every so often. So those were really interesting conversations. The programming of a 24/7 station, working with different genres, was an incredible experience for me.
Are you still involved with WRSU?
I have Mike Pavlichko, who I worked with at WCTC and remained close with in doing games at CTC after I graduated as well, when I was a sports broadcaster for the first 5 to 6 years after graduation. He's now the broadcast administrator. So I'm involved in the sense of whatever Pav needs, I'm happy to come back and help. I do talk to the occasional RSU sports director or staffer via Twitter, makes it very easy. to do so, and many of them do keep in touch. Love following the work that they do. RSU and Targum are two of the more unheralded institutions, I think, of Rutgers, in the sense that I don't know if everybody knows the amount of work that the staffs at WRSU and Daily Targum do to provide coverage, not just of athletics, but of the university at large for the community. So a huge supporter in that regard in terms of their involvement and their continued involvement with the New Brunswick, Piscataway, and Rutgers community at large.
And you were involved with our vision on campus, right?
Yeah, so that's a really cool story. It's probably April of my junior year. So let's say April of 2009. I get a call from then lead sports info director Jason Baum, who was the deputy to Tim Pernetti, who was the AD at the time, saying, listen, we're going to launch this direct-to-consumer television product called Night Vision, which is what it originally launched as. You don't need to know what OTT stands for, over-the-top programming at the time. It was very much in its nascent days. Nobody really knew what it was all about. But we want you to be the first broadcaster. We can't pay you in the first year, so do it for the tape. And then, maybe after graduation, we'll do something with money. And that's what happened. So I eventually used our vision as it became rebranded in 2011, sort of as the tentpole freelance gig for me after graduation. And built a sports broadcasting freelance portfolio around doing games for our vision. Colin Osborne and his crew in Rutgers Athletics do an unreal job. I mean, and the immense amount of improvement of the product that occurred over time with student-run camera ops, student-run truck ops, and Colin being sort of the staff advisor to all of that and the director of our vision. They've had many more resources now that Rutgers have been in the Big Ten that have allowed the broadcast to now be, in my opinion, the industry standard for BTN plus broadcasts around the league. It's not even close. Rutgers puts on the best broadcast. So I have obviously a lot of pride in having been a part of the start of that 12 years ago. And they've continued to improve it day by day. But yeah, that was just unreal experience for me. I wouldn't say I was the greatest TV announcer on earth. I hope that I gave a good product to everybody that saw it. I would call myself an above average TV announcer where I was a little bit better on the radio. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was great to have that as a tentpole item to build around with CTC and IMG and Verizon Fios and the Northeast Conference and all the other broadcasts that I did in the 5+ years that I was freelancing.
Any particularly notable experiences? I noticed you overlapped with some pretty interesting years for Rutgers Athletics.
So are we talking at RSU? I mean, obviously the most notable experience would be the Louisville game my freshman year. That would, I've got the Pandemonium of Piscataway poster right over here behind me. I was doing pregame in the stadium and did postgame as well. There won't be a night like that again. No matter how good Rutgers gets in the Big Ten East, you cannot simulate the novelty that was the first time that everyone got a taste of what it felt like for national coverage, for camping out for tickets. Rutgers could literally play for a national championship someday. And I'm not sure I could bottle up sort of the emotions that were on campus that week. The special feeling that it was of, wow, everyone cares about us. State University of New Jersey is no longer a moniker of making fun of you. It was a pride thing. So for me, that was an amazing experience and had a bunch of really cool moments otherwise in some of the Olympic sports. Bob Riasso, who was the men's soccer coach at the time, was my neighbor from Highland Park. So that was always cool to get to call those games. And being around C. Vivian Stringer's program. I was the voice of Rutgers women's basketball after I graduated for the IMG network. Was a part of her 800th and 900th wins and got to call games both in the WNIT final where they won down in El Paso, as well as NCAA tournament games for them. So I would say those were very special experiences.
So you're essentially on a path as you're going through all this time. And I have to say, I agree with you, except I think that when we beat Ohio State as an undefeated team at the end of 2024, it's going to be crazy.
Hey, nationally, I would agree with you. I think within the Rutgers ethos, it's going to be very hard to ever replicate the novelty of being the nobody knows to everybody knows situation again. But yes, fully agree.
Fair enough. But so you're essentially on a career path of onto TV, radio broadcasting, WFAN, CTC, Fox. That's the career path you're on.
Yeah.
And then in 2016, you kind of take a step back from what I can tell, and you go and you start pivoting to more of a business and consultancy type of role. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like. What was the decision-making process behind that?
Yeah, I'd say the pivot even started a little earlier, probably summer of 14. I came back from doing the WNIT final in El Paso, and everyone has these like life audit moments in their late 20s. I was 26 years old. I felt I was doing really well in my profession. I was a Division I play-by-play broadcaster at that age. I was getting more looks. I knew that it would be time to hire an agent and go on the road more than I was already on the road. And I don't know, I didn't think I was learning, right? I had learned in a trade. I was good at what I did, but I wasn't necessarily understanding the industry at large or where it was heading next. So I think that scared me a little bit. I was a terrible standardized tester, just good enough to get, terrible is the wrong word. I was a good enough standardized tester to get me into the 2006 version of the Rutgers College Honors Program. I do not think I would have gotten into today's honors college, considering the high-end academics that, from an SAT perspective that they require for that entry. I was a grade getter, but never a standardized tester. So I put a lot of time into studying for the GMAT, specifically with a tutor. Knew I wanted to get an MBA just to have like a more holistic understanding of business. Media, tech, sports were my passions, and that would be where I would stay. But the functionality, I didn't see myself 30 years later as Joe Buck or whomever was in those roles. And I think that scared me at 26. I was like, all right, well, then you have to go learn something else. That you have interpersonal abilities. You can communicate. You can work in business development. You can work in partnerships. Now go find out how. And I was fortunate enough to get into NYU Stern for my MBA and developed a new network there in addition to my Rutgers network, which was incredibly useful to go through that process too. You noted I did 3 MBA internships in 2016 to really pivot because who's going to hire the sports broadcaster to do business development for them? And that was what I had to do. Worked for NBC Universal, Wasserman, and Brave Ventures, which was acquired by Turner. And had the really interesting experience at Fusion Media Group right out of business school, working for a subsidiary of Univision, doing audience development for a marketing team. And when that was reorganized, I ended up at In Demand, where I've been for the last 3.5 years, a subsidiary of Comcast, doing content distribution deals, working on licensing and content delivery deals, which has been an unreal experience. And actually in mid-December here, I'm going to be moving on to a company called Frequency, which is about a 10-year-old startup that works in the free ad-supported streaming television space, helping content providers launch what's called fast channels. That's the acronym on various connected devices. So think any of the free content that lives on your Samsung TV Plus, your Roku channel, and the like. So I'll get to do distribution deals. And there you go. Yeah, there's your Roku device. Exactly. Get to do those distribution deals and ad sharing deals as well. So really excited for that. And I think it's adding a tertiary skill set to my resume that, down the line will be useful to me. And as you said, it was a pivot. It was a life pivot in many respects. I had lived in New Jersey for 27 years, albeit traveling quite a bit before I moved into the city, and I've been here for 6.5 now. In New York, and I mean, as I'm sure we'll discuss, I still commute down to Piscataway very regularly with sometimes NJ Transit's woes keep me stuck on the rails, but I get down as much as I possibly can.
For those who are watching, if you ever want to see if Danny's stuck at an NJ Transit station, just follow his Twitter because
right.
It's always on there. I want to take a step back, though, and I want to dig a little deeper into something you mentioned about having this Stern community along with the Rutgers community. Obviously, this is with the Rutgers Alumni Association, and a big part of what we do is trying to create those lifelong communities and create those lifelong connections between both students and alumni. Can you talk a little bit about some of those connections have helped you, especially as a Rutgers in the Rutgers community, but just overall, and maybe a specific mentor that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, so many. John Newman obviously has been amazing to me in meeting him through his donation to Night Vision back in 2009, and then through our time in launching the Scarlet Spotlight when I was just coming out of business school because wanted to keep my toe in this, and how could I not when I knew that we could put on some really cool shows as we have for nearly 100 episodes now. And right around when this drops, I'm sure we'll be prepping for episode 100 at the top of 2022, which we're really excited about. I've been introduced by John and by others to so many real interesting people in the Rutgers community. You know, I think Mark Beal, top of mind, somebody who's worked in public relations and teaches at Rutgers for many years, who introduced me to many people in the alumni community. You know, Mike Finkelstein, who I took at Rutgers, Bruce Reynolds, Steve Miller, just incredible professors that have continued to share their network throughout time. And when you go into the media space and you meet all the Rutgers people, like the Mike Pavlichkos of the world who've done this for years, you get onto the business side too, and you realize they're everywhere, right? And that was really great when I was at Stern. What's great about grad school is that nobody will be afraid to talk to you, right? Like you can reach out to anyone and ask for coffee. Ask. Zoom really didn't exist in this level of proliferation when I was there, 5 years ago, but the building of community and the building of networks to me is more underrated than anything, because if you can do it and you can do it skillfully and you don't make any conversation feel like it has to have something at the end for you, but rather just you take something from the conversation or you get an intro, to me, those are the most authentic relationships you can develop. And, I continue to meet people, I feel like month to month, that I never knew were a part of the network. Greg Brown, the CEO of Motorola Solutions, we share both the Highland Park High School and the Rutgers University community in that regard, which is amazing. And I played junior varsity baseball for his late father-in-law. So it's unreal. As he was former chair of the Board of Governors, now runs the athletic committee for the Board of Governors. So the networks run deep. They're everywhere. They're CEOs of S&P 500 companies. And you should continue, whether you're a student, undergrad, grad at Rutgers, to reach out to those people there. And especially now with Zoom, they'll give you your time. Even if it's 15 minutes, they'll give you time, and that could create a lifelong connection.
Is that your advice to alumni students more than anything else?
Every day of the week. I mean, I would say do your job first, whether that's being a student or living your life. But carve out an hour a week, sit down, go through LinkedIn, send a couple cold emails, try to get warm intros. Those are always the best. You have somebody who you think can provide you with a warm intro. It's easier for the person that you're reaching out to as well, to say, hey, maybe a couple months from now it's a better time or whatever, if things are a little insane on their plate. But yeah, I mean, you're a student. Even if you're a young alumnus, go out and do it. I don't like anyone that's threatened by someone reaching out to them, even if they're in industry. I feel like we should information share. That's how things get done in this world. But some people are threatened. But generally, if you share a network, that being an undergrad or a grad alma mater, it makes the conversation so much easier.
Let's talk about a little bit of how that networking's come into play. I mean, you mentioned John Newman, and obviously we've mentioned the Scarlet Spotlight a little bit. For those who don't know, what is the Scarlet Spotlight?
Sure. We launched it back in early 2018. Scarlet Spotlight is a bi-weekly podcast. We'll sometimes get off of script in terms of how often we release, sometimes 3 in a month, sometimes 1, depending on our own work schedules. John runs his own PR company, so that comes into play too. But we highlight, it's an interview-based show. So about 25 to 30-minute interview with the particular guest or guests for that show, all from the Rutgers community, current, former coaches, athletes, and administrators. And then John and I will do, sort of what we call the Scarlet Six. Never is really 6 topics, but the news and notes of the week around Rutgers athletics and the community in sort of a debate segment. So I'd say every show comes out to about 35 to 45 minutes, some on the long end to an hour. But it really ends up being an awesome experience to keep the voice in the Rutgers community and continue to have those conversations and meet new people, right? Like Dr. Holloway was on a few weeks back, which was a really great conversation. We had Governor Murphy on during the height of COVID last July, which was amazing. And Dr. Jay Tishfield, who I've known for decades, came into the genetics department when my father was Dean of Life Sciences years back. So as they were launching the initial COVID test through Vault Health. So it's been a wild ride. Never really expected we go through a pandemic with it, obviously, but here we are. It's I think now something that the Rutgers community really looks forward to. And we just announced we've had 100,000 unique downloads since March of 2018.
Congratulations. And
Okay.
what was the impetus for starting it?
Good question. I think John knew that there was like a hole in content for Rutgers fans. He knew that I had the broadcasting chops to be able to make it work and the connections within the Rutgers athletic department for us to get guests. But at the same time, I think he was a little concerned that we would be seen as this state media in some ways. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an understanding with the athletic department that, hey, we'll do these great interviews, but we want at the same time to have some level of independence to have more interesting conversations. And I think for me, it was, as much as I know that I made the right decision moving away from full-time broadcasting, I still wanted to keep a toe in it. So for me, I think that was part of the rationale was, hey, we need to still do this passion project and make sure that we can have a good time and create some good content for Rutgers fans.
That's awesome. And it's a really great podcast. I recommend anyone who's listening or watching this to check it out.
Yeah,
but
we just interviewed Ryan Hart and Mike Teal, so that'll come out before this drops. So.
Two of my favorites. I have a story where when they used to do the lineup where you could go and walk down each one at the football players instead of having lines for each player. We're going down the line, and I toss a tiny little football. I'm tiny at this point. I toss a tiny football to Ray Rice. He starts to sign. I said, no. It's for Ryan Hart and Brian Leonard. He goes, I'm going to be good. You're going to regret it. And I let him sign it. But we've talked about a lot of the stuff you've done that have been really successful. What's something that didn't go so well, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially there have been lots of things that I've done that haven't been successful. I would say that the early decisions that I made in my post-MBA career were certainly maybe rushed because of timing. A lot of the hiring and media is done on an as-needed basis as opposed to investment banking or management consulting or some of the more traditional fields that happen post-MBA. So I think the approach to job searching has sometimes been less formulaic than I would like. Undergrad, I think developing relationships early on that are authentic. I was different as a freshman in college. I was hard charging. I really wasn't great at taking feedback. And I think all of my friends who are now some of my best friends from that WRSU sports staff would tell you that freshman year Danny was kind of the worst. And I think that, in so many ways, 18-year-old self, you can learn a ton by what your friends tell you years later were some real character deficiencies or some things that you needed to read the room a little better about. I learned so much about myself in those 4 years of college, just in terms of the emotional intelligence and how to deal with people that are going through so many different things in life. I've become a lot more aware of mental health in recent years. My mom's a mental health professional, and I probably should have been more cognizant of that at a younger age. And I think to me that was a key mistake that I made early on, was not having that level of empathy sometimes for others that I've had for myself or those that are really close to me. So that's what I would recommend to any student or young alumnus trying to break into professional life, is that, at NYU, they use a phrase, IQ plus EQ. And that's really, to me, the equation that works. You can have your intellect all you want, but if you don't have the emotional quotient, then no one's going to want to work with you.
Perfect. I know we're coming up on time. We've got a hard stop at the top of the hour. But is there when you're talking as a Rutgers alumnus, we were talking a little bit about, you were saying you don't really like 9 p.m. games because we're recording this on the day of the game against Clemson. Hopefully, our Rutgers basketball starts hitting threes.
Yeah.
But and we could go into that all day.
I could give you 5 thoughts on that.
Right? Yeah, but let's talk about kind of staying connected to Rutgers in more than just sports. Because a lot of the folks we speak to, it's always the sports that bring them in, and then there's other parts that bring them back. So let's talk about that. What other parts of Rutgers are you connected to?
Yeah, I could start by saying, at the dinner table, I'm as connected to the research side of Rutgers as pretty much anyone can be. My father was one of the highest grant getters in university history and continues to be published. I would say those, and I grew up as part of the Rutgers community way more than just athletics. Look into what kind of research this university does. It's not just sciences and life sciences, it's philosophy. It was the #1 ranked philosophy department in the world for a lot of time. It might still be. I can't say that I've kept up on that. The School of Communication and Information, as I've said, is a diamond in the rough. Even though WRSU isn't directly affiliated, so many of the staff assist in the folks that are at Targum, that are at RSU. Have an understanding of all these incredible resources that are there. It is such a bifurcated university in the sense that it's so big, it's spread out. There are distinctions. Some of the old school broken up colleges feel now that it's amalgamated into School of Arts and Sciences that they still exist because they still have their own brand identity. Cook and Douglas and Livingston, and they have their own feel, even though Livingston now feels like a city more than it was when I was there. Have a better understanding of the history, better understanding as to why there's a bit of a unique identity for each department and each segment. It's an amazing place. I've gone, as I've said, to a private institution now. I've lived in the greatest city on earth, but nothing will ever feel like home more than Highland Park, New Brunswick, Piscataway to me. And that's because of the university at large. So I think as an alumnus, yes, of course, a winning football and a winning basketball team will help you come back and be more engaged with a weekend event and tailgating and the ability to see friends and family. But do contribute, do be a part of other aspects of the community too, because that is so much a larger piece of the university budget and the university focus than the athletic department, even though it's obviously got a near and dear part to my heart too. Perfect.
And Danny, with the last minute, any last minute thoughts you want to share? What's next? What's the next big thing?
Yeah, if you work in the media business and you need help with a free ad-supported streaming television channel, you know to come to me.
Throwing in the ads, an NYU grad to the end.
Got to do it, man. If I'm going to be in a role with commission, right? I got to take advantage of it too. So, no, I would just say, as an alumnus, I love that the Alumni Association is doing things like this. I think it's incredible value, and I hope that students and young alumni do reach out because I really believe there's a ton of alumni out there that want to talk to you. It's just that people have to be proactive. They're not going to look for you. You got to find them.
Perfect. Danny, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Go RU.
Thanks, Jordan. Go RU.